Okay, so I'm Shawn. I work for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which I'm very proud and pleased to be an awesome part of that team. And I don't remember exactly how I ran into Htmx, but I'm 99% sure somebody posted a link to the Drupal.core issue we'll talk about toward the end in Drupal Slack. And I thought, what is that? And I started clicking around, and I got excited. So Hypermedia. Hypermedia is not new, but it's new to a lot of people in web development today because the whole JavaScript methodology is not Hypermedia. So why do we call it the web? Because this is a graphic from 1995 mapping connections between web pages because they all connect to each other. They're hyperlinks. They have controls, and it's how we branch. So HTML on its own has two hypermedia controls. We have the A tag, and we have the form tag. A tags do GET requests. Form tags can do either GET or POST words. So hypermedia applications use a declarative syntax in the HTML. You can look at the source code of the page, and you can see what it's doing. It's declared right there in the markup. And they interact with the server using HTML. In other words, they send a request, they get back HTML. That is the original RESTful architecture of the web. And hypermedia applications use this long acronym, HTOS, but it means that the state of where you are in the web application is encoded in the hypermedia on the page. That's hypermedia. Okay, so Htmx is built to make hypermedia applications even more powerfully. The thing that got my attention in this original posting was it was a rising star. Well, what is that? I'd never heard of that. If you're well into the JavaScript community, you know what that is, but I didn't know what it was. And it's this organization that goes into GitHub, and you know how you can star a repository in GitHub? So they go do a differential every year among JavaScript projects to see who gained the most stars in the last year. Among all JavaScript projects, Htmx was number 10. And among JavaScript frameworks, it was number 2, only to React. So that got my attention. There are 5 aspects to Htmx. Behaviors are described within the element, in the HTML. You can look at the HTML and you can see what it does. Any element can trigger an HTTP request. Any tag. Any event, any JavaScript event can trigger an HTTP request. And all the verbs of HTTP are available. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And you can target any element in the document for replacement. I'm really interested in what very interactive things we can build with just those 5 amazing building blocks. So let's look at features. Behaviors are described within the element. So here I have a snippet of code. We have 4 attributes on this tag. In Drupal, we always try to use compliant HTML. So Htmx will read data dash, or because browsers don't break when you put garbage in the markup, the natural way of writing Htmx is to just say hx-post, but that's not compliant, so we do it this way. So you've never seen this before. Who's never seen Htmx before today? All right, most of the room. So data hx-post, what does that do? Anybody? Makes a post request. Yep. Data hx select is going to select from the thing that's coming in something to use. So it's a selector. That's a CSS selector for syntax. Data hx target, that's the thing I'm going to replace. So I'm going to select the thing, I'm going to replace the thing. Those can be CSS selectors. Swap is, how am I going to do that? What's my strategy for replacement? So here, outer HTML. So I'm going to replace the thing I'm targeting, including the outside tag. The only thing you might not know, looking at this and never having seen HTMX, is ignore title true. HTMX, by normal strategy, when you do something, if the incoming request had a title, it swaps the title on the tab. Well, usually in Drupal we don't want to do that, but oops, I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, so any element can issue a request. Any event can trigger an HTTP request. Here, consider this bit of markup. The trigger is revealed. That's an HTMX event that HTMX adds on to JavaScript things. But think about this. This is a views row markup. That is infinite scroll in 4 lines of declarative text. Make a request for the next page, trigger that when it's revealed, replace the table body, or select the table body, and put it after me. If you don't say, if you don't say have a target in your declaration HTMX, then the natural target is the tag that has the markup. So that code, if I'm right, could be a mistake in my code, but that would add more rows, the next page of results from a view, onto the end of the table. And if you did that at the end of the next thing to have page 3 and page 4 and page 5, you've done infinite scroll in 4 lines. Okay, so we have all the verbs. There's a method for get, there's a method for put, patch, post, delete. It does all of them. That lets us do things richly. Like currently, our form processing only takes post. But let's say we could rewrite it, and it would take delete. You wouldn't have to go to a delete path to delete an entity, or to delete something the form is controlling. You could just make a delete request to that route, rather than a post request. Target any element for replacement. Kind of talked about this already, but the target property is a CSS selector. Take the thing you're getting, put it over here. So those are the basic features of HTMX. So let's compare it to most JavaScript libraries. Oh, something I forgot to say. That URL you've got in your phone, there's a Q&A tab on there. If you post questions there and I don't get to them in the session, I'll answer them after. So if any questions occur to you, you're welcome to post them there, or you can raise your hand when we're done. Okay, typical JavaScript approach. Creates behaviors using an imperative syntax. In other words, it gives commands. And that's separated from HTML. And most JavaScript frameworks interact using not even just JSON API, but just some sort of proprietary JSON back and forth thing. And state is modeled in JavaScript memory, not in the HTML. So if you want to put a click behavior on the actual image that's in the DOM, that's in the document model, that's in the browser, you have to put a click behavior in JavaScript on the representation of that image that's in JavaScript memory. And if you go to the code in your browser, developer tools have gotten better. Now a lot of them have a little event bubble that puts next to the thing that tells you that there's some JavaScript that's put an event on this. But if you don't see that, you don't know there's something going on. And even if you want to know what's going on, you have to click the thing and go over into the JavaScript code and read the JavaScript. It's more obtuse. HTMX is different. It's smaller in scope, it only does certain things, and it's smaller in size. So, lower page weight. This is HTMX compared to React. And if you're using that on every web page, it's going to slow you down. HTMX extends HTML. I remember the very first time back in the day when Angular was the thing, I was looking at the source code of an Angular application as it was happening. And HTML was simply used as a scaffolding device that Angular had some classes on. And you couldn't tell, there were no links. You couldn't tell what was connected to another thing. HTML is what built the web. It's what still runs the web, and HTMX just extends it. It has no other dependencies. That says a lot in today's world. Like you do npm install and you get 250 different packages and so on and so forth. There's none of that. It doesn't need a compiler or a transpiler. It's just itself. It's very self-contained. Okay, Htmx in a Drupal project. So I help maintain the Htmx project on Drupal.org. It's installed like any other Drupal module. And did I go too fast? Yeah, and so then either you need to attach. So we have some implementing JavaScript that connects some things. We'll talk about what that does in a little bit. So you either connect it in your template, or you attach it in your build array. Either way, now you're ready to use Htmx in your project. And because Htmx is released on a license that is essentially public domain, there's a particular license that says in lawyerese, this is public domain. That's the license that it's on. So we're able to distribute the Htmx right from Drupal.org because public domain is compatible with the GPL. And so you just install it, you've got Htmx. Those things are attributes, right, in HTML terms. So we've extended, in contrib, we're extending the attribute class because there's no interface. Turns out in core for the attribute object, it's just there. In the contrib work we're doing, we have actually made an interface. We'll talk about that. But then you need to build up your attributes. So our class that we're providing in the module is essentially an attribute builder that is dedicated to HTMX. It knows what the methods are, the things that you would want to build. And so you want to do a post, you give it a URL object. You want to do other things, you give it a string. You just do that. You don't need to know how it outputs in the attributes. You don't have to remember what those syntaxes are. When it renders, it'll be right. And then you can add that result to a render array. So in this particular case, I know I've got all the attributes that I need, and so I'm just putting it out to an array. Technically, you could just put the object, but there are people who've gotten used to being able to change attribute arrays around various things and various hooks. So it's respectful if you cast your HTMX attribute to an array, then somebody else can alter it, put on a class, whatever. Since this is in contrib, this is extending the basic attribute object, the way that object is made, if you pass it an array of attributes when you create it, it'll store them. So here in this case, I know I want classes and I know I want this ARIA live property, so I can just create my attribute with those. It'll be in there. I can do my HTMX things. When I cast it to array, the other attributes will come along. All right, we have more tools in the box. When you insert a snippet of code from a Drupal request, that could have JavaScript that makes it work, or CSS that makes it work. And if that thing wasn't on the page, you need that stuff to be on the page. Drupal's AJAX system does that for you. We've adapted how that works, using a lot of the same approaches, but some other things that are available in HTMX, and so we do that for you. If there's CSS and JavaScript that's coming in on the request, we add it, and it's not yet on the page, we add it in. Turns out there's 2 different kinds of pages you can deliver in Drupal. I didn't know that. Everything we usually get is the block page, because you want the menus and all the rest of the stuff. But if you're making a request just to get an entity rendered, you don't want to render all those menus and do all those calculations, do all that other stuff. You just want the thing. There's another variant in Drupal core called simple page variant. It does exactly that. So we've put in an option, if you put HTMX route true on a route that you're building, then we will deliver the result to you in this simple page.
So is that for like replacement of HTML?
Yes. The whole idea is that, the question was, is that for replacement of HTML? The whole paradigm of HTMX is you make a request, a regular HTTP request, you get something back, you take a piece out of it, and you want to stick it in. So I don't want to spend time calculating the menus and the footer and the header and the dynamic sidebar thing you've got that tells what changed and who's logged in. We don't want to do any of that. We just want to do the thing you're asking for. So we have a demonstration in the module that you also could use to do something with. It demonstrates an admin UI built with HTMX, but it also provides a Drupal block whose whole purpose is to configure some markup with some Htmx properties that when those properties are triggered, it goes and gets a regular Drupal block and it puts it in its place. An example that I've thought about. Like, we have a login link in our footer, and we only want it for internal users on certain networks. I could build something that creates context in Drupal that says that's an internal user. And I could place a block using Drupal's block system that has conditions. So this block is conditionally only placed if the internal condition is true. And when it renders on load, then it lazy loads in the login block. And so then you would only have the login menu if internal user was true. But it's also in there as an admin user interface example. Htmx has a debug library. Basically, if you put this property on an ancestor of the place that you're working, it'll log everything it does to console log. That's all it does. But it's super useful if you're trying to figure out building some HTMX thing. Okay, we provide a route that renders an entity type, entity in a view mode. Because if you're trying to render like something you're going to replace, maybe you don't want the whole page. Maybe you want to configure a view mode in Drupal and just get the thing that you want. So we do that on simple page. We also just released a twig function that instantiates an HTMX attribute for you if you want to do the stuff in your template. The only thing is, our request methods expect a URL object. So if you're in Twig land and you want a URL object, go look at Twig Tweak. They have a function that does that for you. We also just released a view display. It's another plugin for views that renders on the simple page variant. And if there are exposed forms at the top of the view, it HTMXifies the form so that the form will also make its request via HTMX. And we built a mini pager plugin off the core mini pager that's HTMX empowered. So if you use the HTMX display on a simple route, you get an HTMX operating exposed form and an HTMX operating mini pager. We did that because we want to embed a view from one place in another place, and then it's just there on the page, and it's all running by what you would have called Ajax. We'll get to that in a minute, but it's all happening just from that. So all of those things, I'm really interested to see what you build. There's like 30 sites. This is a relatively new module using this module. If you build something, we have an examples directory in our documentation. Please make an issue and contribute back a markdown page that describes what you built and how you built it, so somebody else knows how to do it. The thing that got me started in all of this was the issue posted in Drupal Slack, which was, let's replace the jQuery Ajax system with HTMX. Now, we're trying to replace jQuery throughout Drupal core. And jQuery was great. It's what we needed at the time. It's everywhere in Drupal because it's what we needed at the time. It's also a lot heavier than HTMX. And it's all being implemented in JavaScript rather than declared on the page. So, So we have a proposal that originally proposed by Alex that we do that. So there's an issue in Drupal core. These slides are available in a link in a moment, so you don't have to write any of this stuff down. To replace gradually Drupal's Ajax system with HTMX. And then along came Theodore, who's the front-end framework lead, and said, great idea, let's build a small proof of concept. So that's where the work is going on currently. This is Drupal's creativity pattern, though, because we innovate and contrib. We try to bring those innovations to core. So I've been figuring out how to do a lot of these things in the contrib module, like the asset replacement and the simple page variant stuff, and then bringing it over to core. So we use that process. But it took me a little while, because I've been developing with Drupal for a long time, but I'm always working in contrib. I haven't done a lot of core development. And of course, I used a class extends class in contrib because you don't change core. and somebody commented in the issue queue, why don't we make an interface that's shared between the attribute object that Drupal normally uses for attributes and the HTMX object that can just be for HTMX. Mind blown. We can change things because we're in core. So I did that. And that means that we can do something like have a #HTMX property that's just for the HTMX stuff. And there's a process then, as the render array is going on to render, to merge those into one final attribute object when it gets to twig, but it lets us detect. In the same way we have #Ajax today, in this proposal we would have #HTMX. And so then this is just what I was just describing. When we're processing this, this scrolls off the screen. So scroll over here. There we go. So we can attach the necessary JavaScript. You don't have to do that for yourself. And then when it gets rendered, we also can do a merge. Collaborators are enthusiastically welcomed. There's about 30 people subscribing to this issue. Not a lot of answers to questions that I might post. And of course, open an issue on the contrib module if you have an idea of how things could be better. But I would love to come out of this with some people who were interested in helping, being a community of creativity to make this better. That's it. Everything I talked about is on GitHub. This talk is in Reveal.js. Everything's open source. It's in that repository, along with a README with links to other stuff. And I think that's my time. What time are we done? Are we done?
2:05.
Okay, and 5 minutes over.
Well, you probably started 5 minutes late because I started 5 minutes
There you
late.
go.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're fault.
All right. So
We're out of time.
we're out of time. If you have a question, since I don't have time for questions, post it on the link that I posted at the beginning, and I'll answer it online. Thank you.